We'll begin the hearing with opening statement. Chair recognizes himself. Government's not supposed to change the rules without a vote of Congress. Executive branch executes the laws. The legislative branch passes the laws. But when you bypass that format, which is exactly what the ATF has done, you get all kinds of bad things. First, it was the pistol brace rule. November 26, 2012, the ATF told the inventor of the pistol brace, quote, he would not be subject to the National Firearms Act. But last year, they changed the rule. After 12 years, changed the rule. The rule, by the way, the pistol brace was put together to help disabled veterans be able to shoot, be able to practice and shoot at the range. Now, with the rule change, if you don't turn it in, get rid of it, you become a felon. Then it was a policy change that the ATF enacted. The ATF now says if a federal firearms licensee makes a mistake on a form, even if it's a clerical mistake, well, that now equals a, quote, willful falsifying of records, and they could lose their license. In fact, 157 FFLs lost their license last year in this gotcha game that the ATF is playing with people who are in the business of selling firearms. And the pressure to deal with what the ATF comes out and finds you made some mistake on a form, many people are just voluntarily giving up their FFL. 24 in 2021, 69 in 2022, 80 people last year gave up their license versus dealing with the hassle from the agency that's supposed to help them comply, not put them out of business. And finally, there's the new definition of who actually needs a federal firearms license. Since 1968, the definition said it had to be your principal livelihood in the business of selling firearms. You needed that. If you were doing that, you needed an FFL. But this past Monday, new definition was put in place. It said if you're earning a profit, ATF can't really define what that means. You sell one gun to your cousin, made $10, made $50 on the sale of a gun, 2 guns to someone, 10 guns. In fact, they couldn't even tell the court how it works, this new definition. When you make up the rules as you go, bad things happen. You lose your livelihood for a clerical error. You become a felon for having a pistol brace they told you was legal for 12 years, and you might even get shot. That's what happened to Brian Malinowski just 2 months ago. We have Brian's widow with us today. She was here with us yesterday. Heard some powerful testimony from U.S. Attorney Bud Cummings, who represents the Malinowski family. In fact, I'm going to read from Mr. Cummings' testimony that he gave in this room yesterday. It's legal to buy, trade, and sell guns without a federal firearms license if you are a collector or hobbyist. But at some point, the ATF decided that Brian Malinowski had crossed a murky line, and he was no longer a hobbyist. Because of that, ATF concluded he was required to purchase a $200 federal firearms license before he sold any more guns. I call it murky because there is no bright line test. It's truly subjective. But one thing seems certain. Brian Malinowski received no warning. His family, his friends, his work colleagues would all guarantee you he loved his career and he would have never knowingly jeopardized it over a weekend hobby. His real job, his main job, the only job, was he ran the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, highest paid official in the municipal government, made $260,000 a year. But on March 19th, at 6:01 a.m., over 1 hour before sunup, 10 carloads of ATF agents and Little Rock Police Department officers came to the Malinowski home to execute their search warrant. Not an arrest warrant, search warrant. At 6:02:46 a.m., ATF agents in full SWAT gear approached the front door. They had a piece of tape ready to cover the camera lens of the doorbell camera, which they did. Next, Mrs. Malinowski heard only a loud crash as her front door caved in. Her husband, Brian, woke up to the sound of the crash, found a pistol, loaded a magazine, and left the bedroom to investigate. Brian warned his wife to stay behind in the bedroom, but Mayor stubbornly followed him down the hallway. The ATF apparently killed electricity to the home. The front room was usually well lit at night, but Mrs. Malinowski saw only darkness as she peered down towards the front entryway. She could only see shadowy outlines of presumed home invaders standing in her front hallway. That's what Brian saw too. Brian fired a few shots at the intruders' feet to drive them back out of the front door. The ATF shot Brian in the head. His wife was standing inches away from him. A mere 57 seconds. 57 seconds elapsed from the time agents covered the doorbell camera until gunshots erupted and Brian was fatally wounded. 6:02:46 to 6:03:43. Agents immediately dragged Mrs. Malinowski into the front yard. She was barefoot, wearing minimal night clothing, and the temperature was 34 degrees. They locked her in the back seat of a car and detained her there for 4 hours, refusing her many requests to check on her husband she had just seen shot, wouldn't allow her to get close or even use the neighbor's bathroom. Even though policies have been in place at both the ATF and the Little Rock Police Department for the past 3 years, requiring the use of body-worn cameras when executing any search warrant, the Department of Justice tells us that no body cameras were used. If this isn't the weaponization of government, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. Mr. Dettelbach, we're going to have questions about this and a host of other things the ATF has done under your watch. A host of other things. We appreciate you being here today. We appreciate you taking our questions, but there's going to be tough questions from folks on our side. And we have a video I'd like to show, which just so it's a minute and a half, but it first shows ATF agents assembling in the Walmart parking lot a week before March 19th, when they were going to execute this search warrant. Again, pre-dawn hours a week before, but decided not to because they realized Mr. Malinowski wasn't home. And then it shows what happened a week later as they approached the Malinowski home. So let's run the video. Chair now recognizes the ranking member. Mr. Dettelbach, what were you trying to hide? On the raid on March 19th at Mr. Malinowski's house, disabled the doorbell camera, cut electricity to the house, and you didn't wear body cameras. What were you guys trying to hide?
Mr. Chairman, we're not trying to hide things. In fact,
Sure seems like it.
You
guys cut electricity to the house?
After the...
Oh, that's a question.
I'm trying to answer. Okay, if there's no question, that's fine. I'm sorry.
No, that is a question. Did you?
After the incident, we, along with the Little Rock Police, called for an independent investigation being done by the Arkansas State Police and the local prosecutor.
No,
That's not trying to hide anything.
I asked 3 questions. Why'd you put the tape on the doorbell camera? Why'd you cut the lights? And why didn't you wear the body cams? What are you trying to hide?
And Mr. Chairman, the reason that we called for the investigation is we're not trying to hide anything. The reason I'm not going to talk about what's going on in that investigation is to respect its independence and out of fairness. There's a reason for the Department of Justice policy that's existed for so many decades about not commenting on pending matters. It's not fair to people, and it risks the perception that people are trying to influence
how about this one? Why'd you ignore the rules? Because don't the rules say you should only use a no-knock entrance into a property if it's the only way, if it's the absolute best way to do it? I mean, I could read from Ms. Monaco's directive. Limit the circumstances in which agents may seek to enter a dwelling pursuant to a warrant without complying with the knock and announce rule because of the risk posed to both law enforcement and civilians. So you want to limit this. Why'd you guys do it all in 57 seconds?
Respectfully, with respect to what I said before, is that we are not trying to hide anything. An independent agency is investigating it, and we, pursuant to longstanding policy, are not going to comment.
The Department of Justice has already told us you guys weren't wearing cameras. I'm just asking why.
For the cameras, our body-worn camera policy, I can talk about that. I think I can answer the question without talking about this case.
You can talk about some things relative to the investigation, but not others. We want all the answers to what's going on here.
I will tell you, with respect to the body-worn camera policy, the Department of Justice announced that policy when it was announced, as we have communicated to your staff and you. It was announced that it would be phased implementation. ATF is implementing that policy. We've implemented it in just under a third of our field divisions. We have not received 3 separate requests for program funding from Congress to do so, but we are still doing it. I watched a hearing a couple of weeks ago where your fellow chairman...
Did the Little Rock police officers who accompanied you on this raid, did they wear body cams?
Again, not commenting on this specific case, but in general, the Department of Justice written policy allows local law enforcement on these types of operations, short-term operations, to follow their own guidelines and policies, if they wish, in body-worn cameras. And what I wanted to say is...
Their policy was to wear them. They weren't wearing them that day. We want to know why. Did you tell them not to wear them?
Mr. Chairman, again, it is simply unfair at this point while there's a pending investigation.
That's a simple question. We just want to know why they weren't following the rules. Their rules say wear body cameras. Your rules say wear body cameras. You weren't wearing body cameras. I go back to my original question. What were you trying to hide? We saw the video where you walked up and you put the tape on the doorbell. We know there were no lights to the foyer area. We have Mrs. Malinowski here who can testify to that. And we know you weren't wearing body cameras. What were you hiding?
Again, Mr. Chairman, we're not hiding anything. And with respect to the body-worn camera policy, the people there...
Why on the 12th did you not go and search the home? You were all circled up, ready to go, but a week before, on the 12th of March, you don't go, you go on the 19th. Why'd you decide not to go on the 12th?
Mr. Chairman, these operations, and by the way, we do about 11,000 operations each year. They're very dangerous operations. ATF doesn't do anything that is not dangerous. Well, it's not quite true, but many of them are very, very dangerous. And those operations are handled by people with decades of law enforcement experience. They plan them, they look at things.
Director, you got to admit, this is a little unique. You got a citizen, the highest paid official in the municipal government, Little Rock, Arkansas, making $260,000 a year, running the airport, no criminal background history, nothing, and he's dead at a pre-dawn raid when it sure looks like you could have served this search warrant when he wasn't there, but you decided not to. You decided to wait till he was home when you did it on March 19th. And as a result, Mr. Malinowski is no longer with us.
Well, first of all, let me just say this, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, any time that there's a loss of life, that is a profound incident. And of course, on behalf of just myself, ATF, and all law enforcement, we are very sorry when those things happen. Also, an agent was shot that day, and I'm sure you are sorry that that occurred also.
Of course, all the more reason to follow the no-knock warrant, not to have a no-knock warrant take place and follow the rules.
Mr. Chairman, as somebody who has worked with law enforcement for decades, there's a great temptation when a horrible incident happens to prejudge. Sometimes people even try to use to advance agendas. The cops who are in the field and the family
I
who's...
just want the answers. My time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, as you may know, I'm the co-lead alongside with Congressman Stanton of Arizona on the bill that's exempting certain less than lethal projectile devices from the Gun Control Act definition of a firearm, tasers. ATF provided some comments on an earlier draft of the bill, noting some concerns with the legislation. I'm sure you're aware of the bill. Does ATF still have the same concerns that we had on the earlier version?
I don't know. Look, Congressman, can I get back to you on that? I don't want to answer precipitously. I know this is an important issue for a lot of people, including some in law enforcement have expressed views on it. So can we get back to you on that? Because I don't know whether any changes in the bill have affected anything.
Okay, so then let me just bear with me then. I'll explain some of the arguments. Hopefully, as the director, your understanding of the Gun Control Act will be strong enough to provide some context. But the proposed definition of less than lethal device would be unworkable in the field, I think, is the issue. Yeah. Because officers and agents cannot measure the projectile velocity during field stops and searches and seizures.
As opposed to centrally, but you're talking about out in the field, I understand. Yes.
So, I mean, ATF doesn't currently test any of the firearm velocity in the field on any of the search and seizure stuff. Is that right or not?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct. It's always hard because some of our operations aren't in Washington. We have operations that are not field operations but are centralized in other places. So I want to be careful. But we have, I think you're right as a general matter, yes. I'll check though and get back to you. If that's not correct, I'll get back to you.
Okay. So to be clear, ATF right now, though, the concerns that this change would be unworkable in the field hinges on the idea that officers and agents would suddenly need to start measuring velocity and checking the internal workings, right? I mean, what I'm trying to get to the bottom, because I think Congress is way beyond ATF on this. I think there's a bipartisan group that certainly is starting to grow when it comes to this technology, and ATF still seems stuck in where we were 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Okay, I understand.
We
will get.
I mean, obviously, you're getting the same feedback that we are, because this is law enforcement wants more.
There are exceptions in the current law for law enforcement, but I understand your concern, and we will get back to you, Congressman. I will commit to you that we will get back to you.
Okay, very good, very good. So with the time that I have left, I just also wanted to submit for the record a letter from Mr. Earl Griffith, who served in the ATF for more than 20 years, retiring as a division chief of ATF's Firearm and Ammunition Technology Division. Mr. Griffith's letter, dated March 6, 2024, is in support of the bill, H.R. 3269, and suggests that ATF already has the existing authority to revisit classification determinations if the manufacturer decides to modify a less lethal projectile device into a lethal configuration. And that's what the manufacturers are doing. I mean, they're changing the technology to kind of match up with where ATF is at, and I think that's unnecessary. I think this thing could be cleaned up if we would just have somebody pay attention to kind of where Congress is moving on this and how quickly we're moving.
Congressman, my understanding is that the statutory language that is at issue in a lot of these is to expel a projectile by means of an explosion. And that is what is causing some of these classifications. Now, Mr. Griffith obviously is a well-respected, longtime ATF employee. We'll look at the letter and try to get back to your office on where things stand.
Yeah, I'm just telling you, Congress is way ahead of where ATF is on this. And that's why I wish you would take a deeper, kind of longer look at kind of where we're at. Because otherwise, the input that you would have is simply not going to be taken seriously if the statute is written or if the changes are already made. So I would encourage you to do that. I yield back.
Gentleman yield. 30 seconds. Will the gentleman yield? Yeah, thank you. I just, real quick, you mentioned earlier that we need to be focused on the facts, particularly relative to the Malinowski case. I just want to make clear, understand. Are you disputing that the ATF was not in Little Rock, Arkansas, ready to execute a raid on the week before, on March 12th, 2024?
I'm neither disputing.
We saw the video. We saw the video, right?
There's a lot of again, this is a slippery slope. I have to abide by our Department of Justice policy.
Saying ATF wasn't in Little Rock
No,
the week before?
I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying that until the investigation is completed, I am not disputing that fact or any other fact. I'm trying to counsel, because I hear a lot of things flying out there.
You said earlier things were stated that were not facts. I think I have stuck to the facts.
I wasn't focusing on
just double
that.
check.
There's been a lot of things said, Congressman. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized. Text is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe with us today, Ms. Malinowski, if you're out there, would you please stand? I'd like to recognize you, Ms. Malinowski. Her first name is Mayor, Director. Would you like to stand up and look at her and apologize?
I've already said, of course, whenever these things happen, it's a tragedy. Of course we're sorry. Everybody is sorry that this occurred.
Yeah, look at her, don't look at me.
It doesn't mean that, I'm trying to also speak into the microphone. It doesn't mean that we can adjudicate this here today. There's an investigation going on. But of course, everybody, and everybody feels bad. I'm sure that a federal agent was shot, not shot at, shot that day. Those things are hard facts for all of us.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to enter something into the record. Your testimony, you say guns are the leading cause of death for children in the U.S. Not according to Snoops. It's a far-left publication. It is traffic crashes. Could I have that entered into the record?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so very much. I was a sheriff, 8 years as in law enforcement, 30, conducted a lot of search warrants. My agency, I would not allow for no-knocks. Just didn't allow it because what we've seen over the past several years, when you have these SWAT teams looking like ninjas coming to doors at 6 o'clock in the morning, it just could cause some problems. You stated in your testimony just a few minutes ago, 11,000 of these a year. Very dangerous, done with very experienced agents, right? What policies do you have when you are going to execute search warrants, arrest warrants, to mitigate risk? Mitigate risk.
Yeah, Congressman, first of all, we do a very, very thorough job of training, which is, of course, as you know, as a sheriff, very important. Second, we have operations planning. We have review of the operations.
Executing a search, well, thank you. Executing a search warrant pre-dawn, early in the morning, knowing people are going to be in bed, how does that mitigate risk? Especially when you do it and it's a no-knock.
So Congressman, as a former sworn sheriff, I assume you would agree with me that police are entitled to due process also.
I tell you what it appears to me is what I've seen from the federal government, whether it's ATF or the FBI, doing search warrants or arrest warrants on J6ers, going in there with flashbangs, with the big Bearcats. I had a Bearcat, I know what it is. And having agents come out looking like they're ninja turtles for combat. I think not only are you scaring the hell out of the entire neighborhood, but when you kick down or break down a door and you don't even announce who you are, what do you think is going to happen? This was Mr. Malinowski there to try to protect his family. He didn't know. If you would have called him, sir, had a casual conversation, were you aware that he had no criminal history?
Sheriff?
I just want to ask a question. Are you aware, did you know the gentleman had no criminal history? No prior?
Am I aware sitting here?
Yes. Were you aware of it?
In firearms trafficking cases, and people who are dealing without a license and buying 150
I'm sure there are a lot of bad hombres out there.
would not have a criminal.
I'm trying to focus on Mr. Malinowski. Were you personally aware that he didn't have a criminal history?
Again, I'm trying to answer your question directly.
Obviously, it's quite clear you weren't. It's quite clear you weren't. And I want to talk about mitigating risk, but were your air agents wearing body cameras that day?
Again, I've tried to say this. I'd like a chance to answer this. The entire field division that covers Arkansas had not yet been phased in.
You have a budget. Try to convince the American people you don't have the do-re-mi to put body cameras on your agents that are conducting 11,000 warrants. These are dangerous by You've got 11,000 of them out there, and you had a budget last year of $1.672 billion with a B. And you're telling me, I'm sorry, folks, I can't provide this transparency to the American people. I can't because I don't have the budget to do so. The American people, there's a problem right now with law enforcement out there. And I have the picture and the image of every law enforcement officer that's been killed in the past 3.5 years, and there's way too many. There's way too many on my wall.
We agree.
And so we have body-worn cameras. And why do we do that? Because there is a lack of trust between the police and the communities they serve. So when you provide these cameras, there's no he said, she said. It's all on record. And you didn't have your body cameras on that day. I'm telling you, it stinks to high heaven. I highly recommend you cooperate with this committee and you try to explain, other than this, I don't have the money to do so and I'm phasing it in. Buddy, you got to get your priorities, reshuffle your priorities and get your priorities in order. And I highly recommend you get body cameras on every one of those individuals that are searching these warrants, because it seems like there's a cover up here. I yield back.
I recognize myself now. Director, you accused a dead man of a crime of illegally selling in the back seat a weapon. And would I hear that correctly?
Respectfully, what I did was talked about the public search warrant affidavit that was filed and proved by the judge. I understand, but you're standing by your search warrant. You're standing by the fact that in the search warrant, you're alleging that he had committed a crime. Is that correct? Chairman, respectfully, I was making the point that a federal magistrate...
You're not being respectful. Answer the question. The question is, did you allege that he had committed a felony, a crime, in your affidavit?
The judge did find that.
Okay. Well, I'll take that as the judge found it because you alleged it. So you alleged a crime, but you didn't seek to arrest him, did you? Did you have an arrest warrant for Mr. Malinowski?
My understanding...
That's a yes or no, Director.
My understanding is that there was not an arrest warrant. I don't have the full investigative file, but that is my understanding.
You came here, you knew we were going to ask, you saw yesterday, and now you're playing one of the games that the chairman and I didn't like during Fast and Furious. We don't like it now. If you want to be back here again, because you can't seem to know what you should know, what Mrs. Malinowski deserves to know, if some group of 10 carloads of people showed up and kicked in a door in the dark of night and somebody came and shot at them, we wouldn't be talking about somebody getting shot in the toe. We'd be talking exclusively about a planned murder of somebody who may or may not be armed, but who had every right to have weapons in their home, an expectation they had weapons in their home, an expectation that they might use it. All of that, you don't have to be ATF to know. So let's go back on track here again. If you had a belief that he had committed a crime, and if your intent was to arrest him, then that would explain why a week earlier you called off an already authorized search, because you were only going to search for the weapons, you weren't going to search for him. Isn't that correct?
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I am not able and will not. It's not fair to do this during the pendency of a criminal investigation.
No, look, it's always, I'm sorry, but DOJ and you guys, it's always, you can go on forever. Hunter Biden's over. Why didn't you do a no-knock on him at his home with the vice president?
To be clear, this isn't our investigation. We in the Little Rock Police asked an outside investigation be conducted by the Arkansas State Police. It's their investigation. The district attorney is going to review that.
And I hope they appropriately find that in spite of qualified immunity, that you blew it badly enough that, in fact, criminal charges should be considered.
I hope they just find whatever the truth is.
What is the penalty for the crime alleged on the affidavit for selling a weapon not as a licensed dealer? What's the penalty?
Oh, my Lord. Mr. Chairman, I believe it's a 10-year felony, and there are two different crimes. It might be a 5-year and a 10-year felony.
Okay.
I want to get back to you to make sure that there's a series of statutes that run all in a row there. I want to make sure I'm not mixing up the statutory
5 years or it's 10 years. It's not a death penalty. Is that correct?
There is not a death penalty for that statute, no.
Okay, so Mr. Malinowski was not in any danger of being executed for what he is alleged to have done and no longer can defend himself because he's dead. But he was killed doing what any normal citizen does when people enter their home in the dark of night and they don't know who they are. If you had body cameras, maybe Mrs. Malinowski didn't hear right. Maybe you said police and identified yourself. Maybe he said, I don't care, and maybe he fired the shots. I don't believe that, and I don't think you do either. I believe he had every real belief that he was defending his wife and family. He fired warning shots, a ricochet hit a police officer or an ATF agent, and you killed him. Those are the facts. I have been investigating ATF for many years, and ATF agents have rightfully so, and with great trepidation, I'm sure, come forth and been our whistleblowers. And we've consistently seen there are two ATFs, the one we need and want and deserve, and the one that plays fast and loose, like 10 cars going in deliberately with a warrant that did not entitle an arrest, when in fact, if you wanted to arrest him, it would have been reasonable to arrest him at work and simultaneously go into his home. If you had done that, he'd be alive today, and we'd be talking about other things, including whether you acted legally. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Dettelbeck, I'm just curious. Have you expressed remorse to Mr. Malinowski's widow and family?
I'm sorry.
Have you expressed remorse to Mr. Malinowski's widow?
I will now, and I have before this morning, yes.
What have you said to them?
Well, I said it here in open forum, but
What
what
have
I
you said
said
to
was,
them
of course.
personally? Have you
when-
talked
of
to them
cour-
personally?
I'm sorry?
Have you talked to them personally? Have you expressed your sympathy to them personally?
I-
Or you
The
just make
gentleman
public
yield?
statements and issue press releases?
Would the gentleman yield?
No. Answer the question, please.
Yes.
He just did it.
All right, thank you. Did you know about this raid in advance?
We do 11,000 operations a year, and
did you know
I
about this
believe
one?
that, and it would
Did
be.
you know about this one, Mr. Dettelbach? Yes or no?
And I believe the first I heard about this matter was after the fact.
And who have you disciplined? What have you done?
Sorry?
What have you done in
is
response to
what
this?
we went together with the Little Rock Police, who were also present. We went and we requested an outside agency to do an independent investigation. We fully cooperated with that investigation. That investigation, my understanding is the file has now been turned over.
I think this committee is going to want to look into this matter in much greater detail. I need to press on. Let me just ask you a general question. What do you think is the purpose of the Second Amendment?
Like all the amendments, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to protect fundamental rights of Americans.
And you believe that a fundamental right of America includes the right to bear arms?
I believe that all the rights in the Bill of Rights are important and fundamental rights, including the Second Amendment.
Great. In the second half of 2021, only 34 inspections led to a firearms dealer having their license revoked. However, the number of qualifying violations dramatically increased to 252 in 2022 and jumped again to 407 in 2023. Now, either there's been an exponential increase in crooked firearms dealers since Biden took over, or there's been an exponential increase in zealotry by your agency. I assume you would say it's the latter.
The laws that Congress has passed and have been in effect say that willful violators of the Gun Control Act are subject to, they may have their licenses
We've
revoked.
seen an exponential increase. I mean, just off the charts since you took office. And that seems to coincide with a dramatic reduction in people willing to legally expose themselves to pre-dawn raids on their homes. The number of voluntary business closures post-inspection has risen sharply from 24 in 2021 to 69 in 2022 to 80 in 2023. Now, this tells me that this is a deliberate policy to drive firearms dealers out of the business, not only with the reign of legal terror, but in the case of Mr. Malinowski, the actual reign of physical terror as well. Now, I know you're not going to agree with that, but can you at least see how that appears to others?
Respectfully, I disagree. The enhanced enforcement policy, which is publicly available, the terms of it, state very clearly that we're not talking about paperwork violations. We're talking about willful violations that impact on public safety, like refusing to run a background check, selling to a felon, not respond.
What we're seeing is an exponential increase in actions against dealers, followed by an exponential increase in dealers just saying, this isn't worth the legal exposure, I'm out of here. What's involved in getting a federal firearms license?
There is a process to get a license, right? You fill out an application, you pay a $200 fee, and there's a compliance inspection, or not a compliance inspection, an application inspection that goes on. But just like the inspections and the process, for a revocation, for a compliance matter, there is ample due process. There are hearings that go on, and in our own hearings.
But it's a fairly lengthy process. Now, your agency's rule says, quote, that even a single transaction or offer to engage in a transaction, when combined with other evidence, may be sufficient to require a license as an FFL. What does that mean?
That is one sentence out of a 16-page rule.
Well, what does that
The
say?
rule says, this is a matter before the courts. Our positions on all of these things are in pages and pages of briefs that it would take far too long, and I know you have time limits, but I refer you to those briefs. It's not a secret, but what I would say to you is, it says in black and white, things that might lead to a determination under the totality of circumstances that somebody is engaged in the business, and things that don't.
So if somebody admires my gun collection and I say, you want to buy it, would that require an FFL?
There is a specific provision that Congress has passed that says that people who are bona fide collectors can liquidate their collections without becoming a licensee.
But that's not what this rule
But
says.
of course you would have, and I think that's what you described, but you'd have to look at, obviously, the whole.
That's not what your new rule says.
Respectfully, I disagree. It says in black and white that that is allowed.
Gentleman yields back.